Welcome to the Exec Exchange, 15-minute podcast in which a leader from the water sector shares a story to inspire, educate, and inform other water sector leaders from around the globe. My name is Piers Clark, and my guest today is David Ryan, Chief Executive at SA Water in Australia. David, brilliant to be connected with you once again.
Great to have the chance to be talking to you today.
Now, we all know how these work. The first 90 seconds is me hearing about you and your background. Tell me, how did you land up in this role in Adelaide at SA Water?
I've got a sort of varied background before I got into the water sector. Sport was my background. I didn't quite land where I wanted to. I did a whole range of things and ended up working on sports grounds as the groundsman for many years. And I went back to uni as a mature age student, did environmental science, got into the water sector, absolutely loved it, ended up as managing director at City West Water. And then this gig came up in Adelaide at SA Water. And at SA Water, you're basically responsible for the whole state, urban, regional, rural, remote. And that bit really appealed to me. So I've been in about 5.5 years now and love it.
Brilliant. And just for people who aren't familiar with the Australian geography, the state that you're talking about is obviously South Australia. And because Australia is a unique country in terms of where the cities are spaced, can you just describe what it's like working in Adelaide as opposed to being in, say, Melbourne?
The fairly unique pieces around it, it's the driest state in the driest inhabited continent. It's vast distances. To drive from the bottom to the top of our state will take you 24 hours driving. People spread out a lot. As I mentioned, rural, regional, remote Aboriginal communities, the urban challenges, and we rely heavily on the River Murray as well. Our largest water system in the country, and also in many ways, one of the most contentious as well.
Yes, I tend to put the Murray-Darling Basin in the same category as you put the Colorado River in North America. It sort of starts in one place and finishes in another, but it transects through some really important communities. And what one community does with that water source impacts everyone else in the catchment. How many people are in the South Australia state?
We basically service about 1.4 million, and the large majority of those are living in Adelaide. We've got 27,000 kilometres of water mains. One runs for 800 kilometres. We've got 14 desal plants, varying sizes, groundwater systems. I mentioned the River Murray and reservoirs as well.
So I've got it. You've got a significant population, but actually it's quite low density if you spread it out across the vast area that you're covering. You're in the driest state, in the driest continent, and you've got multiple assets that are quite complicated, such as desal units and very long pipelines. And the topic we're going to talk about today is climate resilience, and in particular, how you've dealt with some of the bushfires. So let's move to that now. What's been your personal experience of these, and what's been the corporate experience?
Unfortunately, living in such a dry climate, bushfires are part of our history. They're part of our present. And unfortunately, we know they're going to be part of our future as well. Kangaroo Island's third largest island in Australia. It's about 440,000 hectares. So I think from one end to another is about 150 kilometres. I joined SA Water in November 2019. That summer of 1920 was a particularly bad summer, and the Kangaroo Island bushfires kicked off late December, just before Christmas, but then really burnt all the way through January. And I do need to mention a couple of people over on Kangaroo Island lost their lives, over 80 odd houses lost, tens of thousands of livestock, and also a large proportion of that island is native vegetation as well. And through that, we had continued to provide essential water services, which was enormously challenging because it wasn't like an episode that was up in a couple of days and gone. This burnt for well over a month.
And you just arrived. I guess you'd had experience of being managing director at City West Water, but you were new into this organization, which is an order of magnitude bigger and more complex. What was that like?
Enormously challenging. It tests your resilience personally. But what I saw here at SA Water are the same things I've experienced across the water sector. And I've been blessed to work also at Melbourne Water and Barwon Water as well. And the same characteristics I experienced here is that people care deeply about what they do. At times of crisis where you have an incident like this, people's willingness to come together to do what needs to be done is just phenomenal. And you see the best of people really come out through those experiences. Yes, it was a different organization, different context, different state, but the same characteristics came to the fore.
It is glorious, isn't it? That in the water sector, generally, everybody's proud to be a steward of the environment, and that's what they do. I guess my question is, are there things now that you look at and think, I would have handled that differently if I'd known then what I know now? Or was the organization familiar enough with how to deal with bushfires that there was a set process that was followed that couldn't really be finessed to be better?
I'm enormously proud of the way the organisation responded, and we have good incident management approach. And equally, there were a range of lessons for us. We then had probably the state's largest natural disaster, which was the River Murray floods in 22-23. We learned to be really clear about what are the one, two, three key principles that we keep absolutely front of mind no matter what. On a day-to-day basis, things are changing all the time. There's new things getting thrown at you. And for us, we learned to, first of all, got to keep our people safe. We've got to provide essential services as long as we possibly can to the most number of people, and we've got to protect our assets. And we just set those principles really right at the start of the floods, and that really guided all of our decision making. And I think had we set those principles at the start of the Kangaroo Island bushfires, it may have just helped in some of the pretty crazy things that come up.
I love that. You've got to have these guiding principles that when times are tough, you go back to. It's a bit like your corporate values. You have to test them and check that you're making decisions aligned with those. Right, let's come back to the kangaroo fires. Walk me through some of those crazy things that happened. Some of the things that would be anecdotes that people listening to this podcast might be able to come with you on the journey of what would I have done in that circumstance there, but for the grace of God, go I, is the scenario.
So we have a reservoir over there. We lost the treatment plant. So we put in a temporary treatment to be able to provide water for the community. That relied upon a generator because the power was out. And at one stage, the plant was surrounded by flames. We attempted to get someone in on a helicopter to be able to fuel that up. That didn't work because it was too smoky and they couldn't land. We then put them in a military vehicle to be able to try and find a safe passage through. That didn't work. And then right at the last minute, and this was in the last hour, we were estimating we were to run out of diesel in the generator. There was a fiery country fire service person who just happened to be able to get through to the plant and use the jerry cans there and filled that generator up and kept water on.
No, I can imagine that you find yourself thinking that's one of those ones where the resiliency of what you could have planned to do ahead of time. So tell me, how did the event come to a close? It started in, I think you said November 2019, and it ran on until when?
It was basically December really when it kicked off and ran on till late January 2020. It would often sort of start to die down for a day or so, and then conditions would kick off. And we're talking incredibly strong winds through that period. It was really then about asset protection very much for Country Fire Service over there. And then eventually they managed to get the fire out, conditions go in your favour. And we learned some lessons. And one of those was we needed to build more resilience in our water supply system over there. So we've now built a further desalination plant and connected up some of the separate water supply systems, which provide benefit for the community now in terms of new connections and equally provide greater resilience from a fire protection perspective.
Of course, you didn't know it at the time, but 1 month after the fires had gone out, we were then in the pandemic, and that must have added an extra challenge to the cleanup operation and getting things back on track.
There were an enormous amount of valuable lessons going through the pandemic, not just in responding to something like bushfire and the recovery and cleanup, but equally, how do you lead an organisation through that period?
Thank you for taking us through that journey. I think we can all imagine what it must have been like to be a fresh leader inside an organization facing this sort of testing challenge. We like to finish with a bit of a personal question. The question I've got for you is, what do you owe your parents? What have your parents given you that make you into the man you are today?
Oh, this is a very profound question for me. I'm one of 10 children. I grew up on a small dairy farm. We didn't have a lot on that dairy farm, and my parents were absolutely an enormous influence on my life. Gave me a whole range of things, many of which I try and carry through today. things like, and I know it mightn't sound like the greatest trait or quality, but I think the ability to work hard is really important. And my parents certainly instilled to be a good person. And I think that's really important to carry through in the workplace as well. And to constantly, this piece around curiosity, how can I get better? How can I improve myself? And particularly in the service of others. And I've tried to carry those traits through today.
I am sure they are incredibly proud of what you've done. You have been listening to the Exec Exchange with me, Piers Clark, and my guest today has been David Ryan, Chief Executive at SA Water in Adelaide, Australia. I hope you can join us next time. Thank you.